The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. A vast battlefield stretched across the barren surface of the alien planet Sarnox 9, scarred by explosions and littered with broken machines and fallen soldiers. The sky above was choked, with smoke and flashes of distant gunfire echoed in the distance. The alien fleet, sleek and deadly, had won this fight, or so they believed. Amidst the chaos, no one noticed the lone figure struggling to move beneath the twisted wreckage of a crashed shuttle. His armor was battered, his face covered in dirt and blood, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. Captain Mark Dawes was a human soldier, left behind in the rush of retreat. The aliens believed they had won easily, that humans were weak and disorganized, but they did not understand the stubborn will of one man fighting against impossible odds. Mark tried to pull himself free, every movement sharp with pain. His left leg was broken, and his right arm hung uselessly by his side. But surrender was not an option. Around him, the remnants of the battlefield groaned and creaked as fires continued to burn, and distant shadows moved search parties sent to find any survivors. He knew time was running out. The aliens would not leave any humans alive to tell the tale. If he stayed here, he would die alone and forgotten. But Mark had learned long ago that survival was the first step toward victory. The first step toward changing the fate of entire worlds. His mind raced through everything he had been taught, his training, his missions, his memories of Earth, and the friends he had lost. The galaxy was vast, but Mark was a human, and humans had a way of adapting. His breathing slowed, pain fading just enough for him to think clearly. He had to get up. He had to keep moving, using the small strength left in his right arm. Mark reached for a communicator hidden in his chest plate. It was cracked but functional. He sent out a simple signal, a coded distress call to any surviving human forces, or allies. He didn't expect a response, but hope was a powerful weapon. Far above, alien fleet prepared to jump back to their home world. The commanders were confident, proud of their victory. They had crushed the human resistance on Sarnox 9 with brutal efficiency. The human rebellion was weak, disorganized, and now leaderless. What threat could one wounded man possibly pose? Even as their ships powered up and vanished into the void, Mark's faint signal rippled out into space like a silent scream. Days passed. The planet was silent, except for the whisper of the wind across the scorched ground. Mark dragged himself through the rocky terrain, hiding during the day and moving under the cover of darkness. His broken leg made every step agony, but the thought of giving up never crossed his mind. He scavenged what he could: abandoned weapons, scraps of food, and water from small underground pools. The locals of Sarnox 9, a quiet and oppressed species called the Threxians, watched from a distance. They had suffered under the alien empires, rule for centuries, and had long forgotten the taste of freedom. Mark was a stranger, strange in appearance and language, but there was something in his eyes of fire that reminded them of hope. They saw him moving alone, fearless against impossible odds, and began to whisper stories of the broken human. In secret, a few brave Threxians began to help. They left water and food where Mark could find it and warned him of patrols. Though Mark spoke little of his past or mission, his courage was enough to inspire an alliance. The first spark of rebellion was quietly igniting. Back in the alien command, the news of Mark's survival spread like wildfire. The commanders were furious that one human had escaped, mocking the forgotten soldier as insignificant. But fear grew beneath their arrogance. What if this human could organize resistance? What if he could become a symbol of hope for the many worlds suffering under their rule? They sent hunters, elite soldiers trained to track and eliminate any signs of rebellion. These hunters swept through the forests and caves of Sarnox 9, leaving no stone unturned. But Mark had something no alien soldier possessed: the will to survive and the knowledge of human tactics. Learned from years of war, each encounter with the hunters was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Mark used the planet's rugged terrain to his advantage, setting traps and using guerrilla tactics taught by his commanders. The aliens were efficient killers, but Mark was patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, under a blood-red sky, Mark launched a daring attack. On a small alien outpost, with only a handful of stolen weapons and the help of a few Threxian allies, he destroyed their communication tower. The explosion was a message of warning that the human spirit was not broken. News of the attack spread quickly among the oppressed planets and colonies. The story of the human left behind, fighting alone against an empire, ignited a fire in the hearts of those who had lost hope. Secret transmissions began to carry Mark's message of resistance across the stars. Planets whispered of rebellion, and underground networks formed. The alien empire responded with increasing cruelty, tightening their grip and hunting rebels with relentless force. Entire cities were burned to the ground in ruthless reprisals, but every world that fell only strengthened the resolve of those still free. The war was no longer just about soldiers and battles. It was a war for freedom, for survival, for the right to live without fear. Mark knew the cost was high. He had lost friends and allies. His body ached with every step, but the fire inside him burned brighter than ever. He was no longer just a soldier abandoned on a distant planet. He had become a symbol, a beacon in the darkness. One evening, as Mark sat beside a small fire with a Threxian elder, looked up at the stars and thought about Earth. His home so far away was still fighting. The war was not over, and the galaxy was watching. "I will not die here," Mark whispered to the night. "Not while hope still lives." Somewhere beyond the horizon, the signal he had sent so long ago pulsed faintly in the void. It was a promise that the human spirit would never be broken. And as entire worlds began to burn, one question remained. What would happen when the fire of one forgotten soldier became the flame that could change the galaxy forever? The galaxy was changing. The silent signal sent by the lone human soldier had traveled farther than anyone expected. Captain Mark Dawes was no longer just a survivor. He had become the spark for a fire that could not be contained. From the shadows of oppressed worlds, whispers of rebellion began to rise. But the alien empire was watching. They knew the risk. If this human could unite even a handful of planets, their entire rule might collapse. Mark lay hidden deep inside a Threxian cave. System. His broken leg had begun to heal, but the pain was a constant reminder of the battle he had barely survived. His arm was still weak, but his mind was sharper than ever. Round him, the flickering light of a small fire illuminated the faces of his new allies, Threxian warriors who had chosen to fight beside a human. They were quiet, tense, and cautious. They had seen the Empire's cruelty firsthand, but this was their first real chance at hope. Mark spoke slowly. Using the basic alien language he had learned in his time on the planet, his voice was steady, filled with purpose.
"Al, we cannot wait.
For Earth or other humans to come, we must fight now. Together." The Threxians nodded. Their oppression had lasted for centuries, but now, a human who refused to die had shown them a new way. A way to resist. Using old communication equipment salvaged from the destroyed alien outpost, Mark sent encrypted messages across nearby systems. His words were simple but powerful. "The Empire is weak. They fear us. Stand with me. Fight for freedom." It was dangerous. Each transmission could reveal their location, but the risk was worth it. The first responses were slow, almost invisible. Small groups of rebels, scattered across different planets, began to answer his call. But the Empire's hunters did not rest. Elite squads were dispatched to track the source of the transmissions. Mark and his allies were forced to move constantly. Slipping through underground tunnels and dense alien forests, the hunters were ruthless and well-trained, and each encounter was a brutal test of survival. One night, Mark narrowly escaped a deadly trap when a squad surrounded their camp. Using guerrilla tactics and the element of surprise, he led a daring escape, but not without losses. The pain of losing comrades weighed heavily on Mark. Every face lost was a reminder of what was at stake. Yet, in those dark moments, his resolve grew stronger. He understood that this was more than a personal fight. It was the beginning of a rebellion that could shake the entire galaxy. As the weeks passed, the rebel network expanded. Secret meetings, were held in hidden caves, abandoned space stations, and remote colonies. The oppressed species, once silent under the Empire's rule, began to share stories of Mark's courage. His legend grew, the human who survived alone, who struck back. When no one else dared, the flame of resistance, they called him, Mark's leadership became crucial. He taught his new allies human tactics, quick strikes, ambushes, and sabotage. They targeted supply lines, communication hubs, and small military outposts. Each success was a victory, but the Empire's response grew fiercer. Entire planets were punished with bombardments and blockades. Civilians suffered, and the cost of rebellion became painfully clear. One day, Mark received a secret message from an unexpected source, a high-ranking alien diplomat who secretly opposed the Empire's cruelty. The message was simple, but shocking. "We must talk. There is a way to end this without more blood." Mark knew the risk of trusting an enemy, but the possibility of peace was too important to ignore. The meeting took place on a neutral moon, far from prying eyes. Under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars, Mark met with the diplomat, a tall, silver-skinned alien named Kale. Kale spoke of the Empire's weaknesses, corruption, fear, and growing dissent within their own ranks. He warned that the Empire's control was slipping and that a new alliance could save countless lives. But Kale's offer came with a warning. The Empire will not give up power easily. You must be prepared for a long fight. Mark agreed. There was no turning back. The rebellion was no longer a small spark. It was a growing flame. Back on Surnox 9, Mark's small band of fighters prepared for their next mission, a daring raid on an alien weapons depot. The plan was risky, but the potential payoff was huge. Capturing enemy weapons would provide the rebels with much-needed firepower and send a clear message to the Empire. The night of the raid was filled with tension. Mark led his team through dark forests and rocky terrain, moving silently under the light of 2 moons. The depot was heavily guarded, but the rebels used their knowledge of the land and surprise to their advantage. Explosions ripped through the night as the rebels disabled power generators and seized weapons, but the victory came at a cost. Alien reinforcements arrived faster than expected, forcing a desperate retreat. In the chaos, one of Mark's closest allies was captured. Loss hit Mark hard, but it also steeled his determination. He could not let this sacrifice be in vain. As dawn broke, Mark looked out over the horizon, the first light reflecting off the ruined landscape. The war was far from over, but hope was alive. The galaxy was waking up, and the Empire could feel the ground shaking beneath its feet. Mark whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." The signal he sent out that night would soon reach more worlds. The fire of rebellion was spreading. When entire worlds decide to burn for freedom, nothing can stop the flame. The rebellion was no longer a secret whisper in the shadows. Across star systems, entire worlds were waking up, shaking off years of fear and oppression. Captain Mark Dawes, once a lone survivor forgotten on a distant planet, had become the symbol of a rising storm. The Empire's grip was weakening, but the flames of rebellion burned hotter than anyone expected, and the cost was beginning to show. On the planet Cathera, once a peaceful world ruled by the alien Empire's iron fist, the first open uprisings erupted. Cities that had long been silent now echoed with the cries of freedom fighters. Mark's messages had reached far beyond the borders of Surnox 9. Rebel leaders from different planets reached out, uniting their scattered forces. The alliance was fragile, built on hope and desperation, but it was growing fast. Mark watched. The reports come in from a hidden command center deep beneath Catheris Mountains. The holographic displays showed maps of battles, troop movements, and communications intercepted from the Empire. The rebels were striking hard, destroying supply convoys, sabotaging factories, and freeing prisoners. The Empire responded with brutal force, bombing entire cities and sending shock troops to crush the uprisings. Each battle was a brutal test of will and skill. Mark had trained for wars on Earth, but this was different. The enemy was ruthless and well-armed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But the rebels had something the Empire lacked: hope. and hope could turn the tide of any war. One mission stood out as a turning point. Mark led a small strike team to capture a key Empire warship docked at Cathara's orbital station. The ship was powerful, a symbol of the Empire's control over the region, and capturing it would be a huge morale boost for the rebels. The operation was dangerous. The station was heavily guarded by elite alien soldiers and automated defenses. But Mark and his team had prepared carefully. Under the cover of a solar storm that blinded sensors, they launched their attack. The fight was fierce and chaotic. Explosions rocked the station as rebels fought, hand to hand in narrow corridors, and blasted turrets from the shadows. At one moment, surrounded and outnumbered, Mark found himself face to face with an Empire commander, tall figure clad in black armor with cold, unyielding eyes. They fought fiercely, each strike echoing the desperation of the war around them. Mark's strength and training won out, and the commander fell. The rebels seized the ship, and the victory sent a powerful message across the galaxy. The Empire was not invincible. But the Empire's response was swift and savage. In retaliation, they unleashed a scorched earth policy, bombing villages and cities suspected of supporting the rebellion. Entire populations were displaced. The galaxy burned, and the cries of the innocent filled the void. Mark struggled with the weight of the consequences. Every victory came with pain and sacrifice. The fire of rebellion had spread beyond control, and innocent lives were caught in the flames. He questioned his own leadership. Was this the freedom they had fought for? Or had they become another force of destruction? One night, in a quiet moment away from the chaos, Mark stood on a cliff overlooking a burning city. The sky glowed red with fires that would take weeks to die out. Beside him, a young Threxian fighter named Lena spoke softly. "We fight for hope, but sometimes I wonder if hope is enough." Mark looked at her, his eyes heavy with the burden of command. "Hope is the only thing we have left," he said. "If we lose hope, we lose everything." Their words hung in the night air, a fragile truth in a galaxy consumed by war. But the rebellion was growing stronger. More planets joined the fight, and the Empire's forces were stretched thin. Secret alliances formed even within the Empire's ranks. Some commanders began to question their orders, torn between loyalty and conscience. Mark received intelligence of a traitor within the Empire's highest Council General who secretly aided the rebels. This discovery gave the rebellion a critical advantage, but also increased the danger. The Empire's leaders would stop at nothing to root out, get betrayal, and crush dissent. The war was no longer just a battle of weapons. It was a war of shadows, secrets, and shifting loyalties. Mark knew the galaxy was entering a new phase, one where trust was rare, and betrayal could come from any corner. As the rebellion's flame spread, Mark prepared for the next phase. A massive strike against the Empire's supply lines that would cut off their forces and cripple their ability to wage war. The mission was risky, but necessary. Success could turn the tide decisively. Failure could mean the end of the rebellion. Under the light of a distant star, Mark gathered his commanders. His voice was steady and clear. "We fight for our freedom, for every world burning, for every life lost. This is our moment. We must strike hard, and we must strike together." The room fell silent. The weight of those words settled on everyone. The war was far from over. The galaxy was on fire. And the question remained, how many more worlds would burn before freedom could be won? Mark stared at the stars outside the command center's window, knowing that the fate of the galaxy rested on the shoulders of one human who refused to be forgotten. The rebellion was no longer just a fight between soldiers and soldiers. It had become a war of secrets, lies, and betrayal. Captain Mark Dawes had seen many battles, but nothing prepared him for the poison growing inside the rebel alliance. Trust was breaking down, and enemies were no longer just outside. They were inside. It started with small things: missing supplies, failed missions, strange messages intercepted by the Empire. Slowly, the rebels realized there was a traitor in their midst, someone feeding information to the alien Empire, turning their victories into defeats. The very idea made Mark's blood run cold. The Empire was ruthless, but betrayal was a weapon that could destroy everything from within. Mark had always believed in his team, but now suspicion shadowed every face. Who could it be? A desperate soldier, a spy, or someone with a secret agenda? The rebels tightened their security, but paranoia spread like wildfire. Allies began to question each other's loyalty, and old friendships cracked under the weight of fear. One night, Mark gathered his closest commanders in a hidden bunker beneath the ruined city of Verax. The air was thick with tension, as the dim light cast long shadows over their faces. "We have a traitor," Mark said quietly. "Someone here's betraying us. We need to find out who before it's too late." The commanders exchanged worried glances. None wanted to believe one of their own could turn against them, but the evidence was clear. Recent missions had failed in ways no one could explain. Plans had been leaked, and rebel forces were walking into traps. Mark's mind raced. He remembered every conversation, every decision, searching for clues. He ordered his team to watch each other closely, to report anything unusual. But the spies were clever. They hid behind lies and silence, striking when no one was looking. Meanwhile, the Empire took full advantage of the chaos. They launched a surprise attack on the rebel stronghold on Cathera. The rebels were caught off guard, and heavy losses followed. Entire units were wiped out. The betrayal had cost lives innocent and brave alike. Mark was haunted by the screams of those lost. He knew the traitor's betrayal was not just a mistake, it was a crime that could end the rebellion. His own faith in the cause was tested as doubts crept in. Could they win if they could not even trust each other? Determined to root out the spy, Mark began a dangerous game of deception. He planted false information in small circles, watched who acted on it, and tested his allies with secret missions. The traitor had to make a move, he just had to wait. Days passed, and the tension grew unbearable. Mark barely slept. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every voice a whisper of betrayal. He remembered why he had started this fight, to free worlds from fear. Now fear was inside his own camp. Then the truth came crashing down. A young rebel named Kira, once trusted and loyal, was caught trying to send data to the Empire. Her confession was a shock. She said she had been forced, threatened by her family, still held captive by the Empire. But the damage was done. Mark faced a terrible choice: punish her and risk losing the fragile trust among his people, or show mercy and risk more betrayals. He chose a middle path. Kira would be kept under watch, but her skills were too valuable to waste. The rebellion could not afford to lose anyone, even a traitor. With Kira's help, Mark uncovered more secrets. The Empire was preparing for a massive strike, a plan to crush the rebellion once and for all. They had gathered their forces in secret, ready to destroy rebel bases and capture key leaders. The rebellion's time was running out. Mark knew that to survive, the rebels had to act fast. They launched a bold plan to strike first, to hit the Empire's staging ground before the attack could begin. It was risky, but the only way to take back the initiative, as the rebel fleet moved into position. Mark stood on the bridge of the stolen warship, staring into the blackness of space. The weight of betrayal still pressed on his mind, but he pushed it aside. The fate of countless worlds depended on this moment. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic. Explosions lit up the stars as ships clashed in deadly dogfights. On the ground, rebels fought through enemy lines, sabotaging weapons and freeing prisoners. The Empire fought back with all its might, but the rebels had something stronger: desperation. And hope. In the heat of battle, Mark faced his own darkness. He realized that the fight was not just against the Empire, but against fear, doubt, and the shadows within. Every choice mattered, and trust was the most dangerous weapon of all. When the smoke finally cleared, the rebels had won a costly victory. The Empire's strike had been stopped, but the price was high. Many lives were lost, and the betrayal had left scars that would take time to heal. Mark looked at his team, tired, wounded, but unbroken. The war was far from over, but the rebellion had survived its greatest test. The fire of freedom still burned. As Mark prepared for what lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: the galaxy was watching. And the next chapter of this war would be darker, harder, and more dangerous than anything they had faced before. But the flame inside him refused to die. The rebellion had survived betrayal and devastating attacks, but the war was far from over. Now Captain Mark Dawes faced the hardest challenge yet: a final strike against the heart of the alien Empire's power. The Empire's command center, a fortress planet called Vorten Prime, held the keys to their war machine. Destroying it could cripple the Empire forever, or it could mean the end of everything the rebels had fought for. Mark stood on the bridge of the rebel flagship, watching the stars streak past as they approached Vorten Prime. Around him, commanders prepared troops and weapons for what would be the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen. The tension was electric. Every soldier knew the risks. Many would not survive. The plan was bold. The rebel fleet would attack from multiple directions: space, air, and ground. Mark's team would lead the ground assault, infiltrating the fortress to disable defenses and capture the command center. It was a mission that required courage, skill, and luck. As they entered orbit, alarms blared throughout the ship. The Empire's defenses were ready. Waves of enemy fighters swarmed the fleet, their sleek ships deadly and fast. The sky filled with laser fire and explosions as the two forces clashed in a deadly dance. The rebel ships fought fiercely, but the Empire's numbers were overwhelming. Mark tightened his grip on the railing, eyes fixed on the battle. This was more than a fight for control. It was a battle for the future of millions of lives. The rebels could not afford failure. The ground assault began under a stormy sky. Mark and his squad dropped onto the planet's surface from a stealth ship, landing in the shadow of the fortress. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. The ground trembled as artillery shells exploded in the distance, moving swiftly and silently. Mark's team infiltrated the outer defenses. They faced patrols, automated turrets, and hidden traps. Every step was a fight for survival. But the rebels pushed forward, determined to reach the command center before the Empire could mount a full defense. Inside the fortress, the tension was unbearable. Mark's mind raced as he gave orders, coordinated attacks, and made split-second decisions. The enemy was relentless, but the rebels had the element of surprise and a fierce will to win. Suddenly, the team encountered the Empire's top general commander, Sarek, a ruthless leader known for his cunning and cruelty. The two men faced each other in a narrow corridor, weapons drawn and eyes locked in deadly challenge. The fight was brutal, a clash of skill and determination. Mark's training and instinct gave him the edge, and Sarek fell. With the general defeated, the rebels pushed into the command center. Controls for the Empire's war machines, communication arrays, and defense systems lay within their reach. Mark's team worked quickly to disable the planet's defenses and send a distress signal to rebel fleets across the galaxy. But victory came at a cost. The fortress began to collapse under enemy fire, and the rebels were forced to retreat. Mark stayed behind to cover their escape, fighting off waves of soldiers until the last moment. The explosion rocked the planet as he barely escaped, wounded but alive. As the dust settled, the galaxy watched in shock. The Empire's command center was destroyed, a devastating blow to their power. Rebel planets celebrated, their hope renewed. But the war was not yet won. Mark's wounds ached, but his spirit was unbroken. He knew the Empire would retaliate, harder and faster than before. The battle had changed everything, but it had also revealed the true cost of freedom in the quiet. Moments after the fight, Mark thought about the lives lost, the rebels who had given everything. He wondered if the price was too high, but he knew there was no turning back. The flame of rebellion burned brighter than ever, and he was its keeper. Across the galaxy, the Empire's leaders gathered in secret, furious and desperate. They swore vengeance and planned their next move. The war would rage on, but one truth was clear: the human who was left behind had become the galaxy's greatest threat. Mark looked to the stars, knowing that the final chapter of this war was still unwritten. The future was uncertain, but one thing was sure: freedom would be fought for. No matter the cost. The war was over, but the galaxy was far from peaceful. The ashes of battle still smoldered across countless worlds, and the scars left by years of fighting ran deep. Captain Mark Dawes stood on the bridge of a small rebel ship, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so distant and cold. Now, they were the lights of new hope, or new danger. The Empire's command center on Vorton Prime had fallen, its power broken by the courage of rebels and one determined human. Yet even in victory, Mark knew the fight was not finished. The Empire was fractured but not destroyed. Its leaders had fled to the far reaches of space, gathering strength for a return around him. The Rebel Alliance was working to rebuild. Planets once ruled by fear were slowly healing, governments forming from the ashes. Mark's role had shifted from warrior to leader, a symbol of freedom to millions. But peace was fragile, and old wounds ran deep. As the galaxy tried to recover, new threats began to emerge. Rogue factions seized power in the chaos. Pirates and warlords took advantage of weak borders, and ancient rivalries threatened to tear the alliance apart. The very unity that had defeated the Empire was fragile. Mark felt the weight of responsibility, like never before. The flame of rebellion had lit the path to freedom, but it also brought questions. How do you build peace after war? How do you heal a galaxy divided by fear and hate? One evening, on the quiet surface of Sarnox 9, the planet where it all began, Mark met with Lena, the Threxian fighter who had stood by him since the beginning. They looked out over the stars, the distant fires of old battles still faint. On the horizon, we won the war, Lena said softly. But will the galaxy ever be safe? Mark shook his head slowly. Freedom is not given, it's earned, and it must be guarded every day. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alert. A distress signal flashed across the rebel communications, an unknown fleet approaching fast. It's unannounced and heavily armed. The galaxy's fragile peace was once again under threat. Mark's heart tightened. The war might be over, but the real battle was just beginning. As rebel ships scrambled to intercept the new threat, Mark prepared to face whatever came next. The human who had been left behind, forgotten on a distant battlefield, had changed the course of the galaxy. Now he would face its future. The stars ahead were dark and full of danger, but Mark's eyes burned bright with resolve. Whispered, "We fight for all who cannot, for the worlds that still burn, for hope." And with that, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what would come next.